Ahora pasaremos a hablar de innovación en el diseño regenerativo de las cadenas de producción y reutilización de recursos. En este espacio conoceremos de qué maneras las empresas pueden transformar sistemas a través del rediseño de productos y servicios, generando un impacto positivo en el planeta y las personas. Para las personas que nos siguen de manera virtual, les informo que esta sesión se realizará exclusivamente en inglés. Si requieren de traducción, recuerden elegir la opción de traducción en español en la plataforma. Ahora le daré la palabra a Andrea Chevasco, Directora Financiera de Plaza Bea. Bienvenida, Andrea.
Hola a todos, es un gusto estar con ustedes acá, tanto de forma presencial como virtual. Y para mí es muy apasionante poder tocar este tema tan interesante como el de diseño regenerativo. Shuya, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you in Peru. Shuya Gong works within the IDEO Collab, a collaborative innovation platform focusing on human-centered design. Shuya is an innovation fellow at Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and Design Director at IDEO. Today we will talk about regenerative design and system shift. Good afternoon, Shuya. Welcome again.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Let's get right to the first question. What is regenerative design?
Regenerative design, I think, is one of the most exciting opportunities we have for us in both design and in business. And it really is taking this concept of how do we think about everything we're doing and shift it from structural extraction, where we're looking at taking resources out of our planet and out of a natural system, to something around systemic restoration. So all of our business and all of our focus is actually on restoring and doing things that are positive for the planet and for the people that are living on it. And I think that what is the most interesting thing about this is that it implies an entire systems shift, and it's really looking at, in the same way I think a lot of businesses went through digital transformation, it's looking at it and saying sustainability is not just a small part or the cost of doing business. It is maybe the whole point of doing business, and it is the purpose and the new mission that we can put all of our power behind as businesses and as corporations and organizations to mimic living systems and have a much more in tune relationship with nature, and learn a lot about how nature systems are able to regenerate on their own, mimic those, and understand those as opportunities and not costs or losses for what we do every day.
That's really interesting. You mentioned the concept of system shift. What does this involve?
Sure. So I think systems are always shifting. Everything is changing at all times, and especially when we live in an age and time when climate is always shifting, it means that everything that depends on climate, which is everything we live in, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the natural resources we need to make all of our physical things, when those things start to shift, all of our systems start to shift with it. So it's really an opportunity to look at this moment and change and say, how are we going to change with that? And so the way that I like to structure thinking about systemic shifts in a regenerative design mindset is really three things. And these things don't really happen in any particular order. They are always happening at different points in time. The first one is new incentives, and businesses make new incentives all the time, whether that's changing the price of something, whether that's changing the language that we're using to market something, or it's the way that we talk about it to friends. You know, I tried this cool new product the other day, I think you should try it too, or, oh, I can't believe you're still using single-use plastic bottles, like that's so 2012. The second thing is behavior change. So once you start to shift incentives, those incentives start to change individual behaviors. If you can get all of those individual behaviors to align towards a collective action, now you start to create a movement, and now you start to create change at a societal scale. And when that societal scale change happens, you've changed the container that an incentive, again, can be into. So that cycle of incentive, behavior change, systemic shift, which creates new incentives and the opportunity for new behaviors and new change, that creates a flywheel and a cycle that nature systems mimics as well. And I think an example of this, not to start first with business, just to start with kind of a like, what does a system shift look like when you're not really expecting it or looking for it? There's this small little town in England, and they were dealing with two problems at the same time. The first one was soil erosion by the side of roads. And then the second one was that in between two towns, highly trafficked areas, people were speeding to just like, here's something interesting, let me get to the next side of town, something interesting. And a lot of traffic accidents were happening along this road. And so in order to restore the side of this road, city officials planted a bunch of wildflowers, not really thinking it was going to do much other than they look nice and they're good for the soil and this environment. What started to happen, though, as they started to track the data of how fast these cars were doing and when the wildflowers were blooming, they realized that drivers would slow down when the wildflowers were in bloom. And it was a weird incentive. You weren't really expecting, you weren't trying to design, let me use wildflowers to slow drivers down. But these two problems from totally different parts of really the same system, this side of the road, made it so that the drivers would slow down when they saw the flowers, and this was a learning that they could apply to other places of let's use restoring an ecosystem, but the side effect of something beautiful happening to an effect that you actually wanted in another part of the system, making roads a little bit more safe and slowing drivers down. And so these individual drivers that would slow down to pause and look for the wildflowers caused all the other drivers to also slow down a little bit because they didn't want to hit the cars. So no matter what incentive was driving these individual drivers in the system, it ended up in the result being this collective shift of that area of road having a slower speed and that stretch of land being much safer and resulting in less traffic. So that's not a business example, but I think that's trying to illustrate what incentives can lead to behavior change, can lead to a larger shift. And the example that I like to point to in business systems is a project that we worked on at IDEO called Beyond the Bag. And that was across CVS, Target, Walmart, and 6 different startups that were all offering very innovative solutions to the single-use plastic bag. And the reason why all of these retailers had gotten together is because there's regulation in the States that is essentially saying that single-use plastic bags are banned, and it would become more and more costly and there would be more fines if you kept offering this solution. And so instead of the retailers all saying like, we're going to come up with our own solution for the plastic bag and we're going to be very competitive and not share what's going on with anybody else, they actually got together and they recognized we are different parts of an ecosystem. The shopper is going to go not just to our store to shop and use a plastic bag, they're going to go to all of our different stores and they're probably also going to use the same bag no matter where they are. At the same time, the startups we were working with, there were 6 of them, were all focused on different parts of the problem. One was working on tracking bags. There were a couple that were working on material innovations, so replacing the plastic with something that was compostable. Some of them were working on dispensing the bags themselves, and some of them were working on the incentives to try and help you remember to just bring a bag from home that you could use. And so with all of these different kinds of incentives, we were trying to design for different behavior change, and to be honest, at the beginning, we didn't know what was going to happen. But I think that was the beauty of it. It was being able to understand which are the different incentives, whether it's price or whether it's just making it easier or helping you remember or giving you something that was like interesting and new and novel to try. It ended up resulting in a whole bunch of different behaviors for shoppers to either remember to bring a new bag or start to bring back their bag to trade it in for something new. And once that started, the program itself is still going on. I think it'll be years, we'll still find out new things that happen. But what was really, really amazing about it is that together they created effects that no one could have predicted. And so in this ecosystem way of changing different behaviors using different incentives, we were able to learn so much more than just trying out one solution alone.
Oh my God, what you propose is truly exciting. And when you were talking about these examples, I connect this with a program that we are developing as part of Macro Supermercados Peruanos, Plaza B, and más. We create a program, Recicla Consciente, where we try to share with our customer the full recycling journey. And I think this requires an integration with different stakeholders, such as government, suppliers, and our customers. And the results are impressive. We reached more than 90 tons of recycled materials. We had more than 1,000 volunteers from 14 different companies and connected with 200 recycles. In that sense, we see this behavior change at the scale, connecting with other actors in order to achieve it. So, following this point, another question I have for you is, what are the conditions for this system shift? It is possible to create this change in Peru considering the level of informality that we have here in our country?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the principles of regenerative design that I always try and consider is you can never really so much control someone to do it in the same way that natural systems use different incentives, whether that's nutrient flows or rather that's, the atmosphere changing temperature for us to change our behaviors. You have to start to understand and address the entire condition. And so to zoom out a little bit, to take to global scale, when we look at who's responsible really for a lot of the effects of climate change, a lot of that comes from the global north. And so a really controversial take, I actually think of it as there's less responsibility. We all have responsibility, but there's less responsibility from the global south, and especially in informal economies to really be the ones who are saying like, okay, let me change my entire life to be able to do acts of sustainability. I think that it's actually much more on the formal economy and people who are upstream making a lot of decisions that affect a lot of people to, one, take that change first and to take two tactics. The first one is to invest in innovations and process changes that allow for an informal economy to not actually have to change their behavior much at all, because what they're doing is living their day to day. The privilege to think ahead and the privilege to think decades into the future is responsibility. That's something that we need to take on. And so when thinking about that and thinking about Beyond the Bag as a system, two of the startups that we invested in and brought on board to the program were one that was looking at replacing plastic with shrimp shells, and the other one was looking at replacing plastic with algae. And so a change like that means that someone who is trying to be sustainable doesn't have to think about making the decision. They're already thinking about so many different things of, how am I going to do dinner today? How am I going to get laundry? I need to go pick up my kids, all of these things. The mental capacity to make a choice about being sustainable should be removed from their shoulders. This should be a very, very, very easy thing that they don't have to think twice about. And that's on decision makers upstream to say, hey, we're going to switch out the regulations or we're going to switch out the material innovation so nothing is really different. I think the other thing that's beautiful about regenerative design is when you think about our ecosystem of doing business and our planet as a whole system that all affects each other, you start to get really creative about businesses, and it's not just enough to be sustainable. You also have to start thinking about, how do I regenerate economies and habitats? And so one of my favorite entrepreneurs created this startup called Clean the Worlds, 2014. And what he did was he noticed that in hotels, there are these bars of soap that are everywhere, right? And like you wash your hair and you do everything, and over the course of a day or two, it's not gone. Like there's still some soap at the end. What are you going to do with it? It's like kind of gross you can't keep taking them home. And so what he ended up doing was, all right, how do I collect all the soap, clean it, sanitize it, make it out into new products? Great. That, if he had stopped there, that would have been sustainable. That would have been awesome. He would have created new products from waste. You went a step further and actually said, how do I make it so that the creation and the process of this soap and making these products and putting them out there in the world, how do I empower communities that are on the ground that are looking for new jobs and new opportunities for employment to take over that process and make it their own? And so two things here in regenerative design, not just making new products and services that are sustainable, but also creating that secondary layer of economies and livelihoods and the process to make those things something that is regenerative as well, creating new jobs and opportunities for communities and people. So I think that's what I think about it, is that, one, make it easy to make the decision, not a decision at all, something is happening in the back end operationally, and two, how do you turn over that power instead of saying like, you should change your life to do something different, it's more, thank you so much for having a lived experience different from my own, what we've seen, what's been traditionally done in business. Here is a platform, make it what you will, and actually teach us about new ways of doing business that are more sustainable for us all.
Oh, that's amazing. I think we need to embrace all the opportunities that we identify in our different businesses. As you know, I work for one of the biggest retailers in Peru. It's an honor for me, and one of the main programs in our company is Bueno por Dentro, that focuses on reduce food waste. And we try to connect this with vulnerable communities in order to reduce food waste and at the same time provide some benefit for them. During the first semester of this year, we have donated the equivalent of more than 30 million soles in food, meaning more than 48,000 rations of food daily. However, we know that we can do more. This goes to my next question. How can we change people's mindset regarding food waste? And what terms does regenerative design to the picture in this area regarding food waste?
Sure. I think there's something fascinating about how our language around sustainability and around waste, at least in English, matters so much. So when we say, oh, I'm throwing food away, there's that question of like, away where? Like away to just somewhere you can't see, but it's still around. And when you say something like, oh, why does reuse matter? My background's in mechanical engineering. It's like, oh, it matters because you can never get rid of it. Like all of the things that we've created ever is still around. How do we start to understand waste is not something that's bad, and we understand it as one of the most important resources actually to flip and turn into something that's really, really incredibly powerful and valuable for us. So the other thing about regenerative design is that you get to look at systems that match each other on the way down, and I think nature does an incredibly good job of this. You look at a tree, and you look at the branches on the tree, and then you zoom in, and you look at the smaller twigs, and it looks the same. And then you zoom in again, and you look at the leaves, and it looks the same, and you zoom in, and so a hallmark of regenerative systems and of regenerative design is that you make sure that every single part of your organization and your business has patterns that are matching. It's all the way down regenerative. So if we take a systems look at this, starting from the very, very smallest example of how you can turn something like waste and turn it into something that's incredibly valuable, I like to look at the example of Kit Kats, which is the chocolate bar, right? So here's a question for everyone in the audience. Do you know what is in between the wafer layers of a Kit Kat bar, right? It's nothing gross. If you think about it, there's chocolate on the outside, there's wafer, there's some chocolatey, delicious filling on the inside, there's another wafer, and it may shock you that it's not just chocolate in between the wafers. The inside chocolate layer between the wafers of a Kit Kat bar is Kit Kats that had some kind of a flaw as they were going down the production line and broke, or the logo didn't get stamped on wrong, or something didn't happen, so they get crushed up and they get turned into filling again for new Kit Kats. So the recipe for a Kit Kat bar requires wasted Kit Kats in there. And I think that that's just a really perfect example of regenerative design at that unit level of we have put waste into our design. We actually need to have a little bit of failure in our process, because it always happens. Anytime you're designing something, you're designing for a little bit of failure, but that failure is actually really important to us, and we're going to take it and we're going to wrap it up into something else, into our original product, and keep using it. It's a part of ourselves making profits, is to be able to fail. So that's what it looks like on a very, very small scale. Zooming slightly out, we were working with Target back in, this was 2016, 2017, to understand what was their strategy to get into grocery. They're very well known for toilet paper, for shoes, for accessories, for diapers, for things like that. They wanted to get into grocery. And one of the things we were looking at was how do we actually help families be able to access a transparent food system that they felt really good about feeding their kids, and also feel really good about telling their kids about, like, well, this is where the food goes, and you know, the environment is important, and have these stories around the dinner table. And one of the things we were looking at was bread and the amounts of bread that was being thrown away from, surprisingly not grocery stores, but from sandwich shops across the United States. So you'd have all of these sandwiches, and then the heel ends of the bread, nobody liked using for sandwiches, so they kept getting thrown away. And so something that we were looking at is, how do you start to understand that not as food waste that you necessarily donate to anyone else, because you know donating, I think, food that no one else wants is such a, there's not a lot of dignity in that. So how do you uphold that dignity? They figured out how to make that bread into beer. And it was really, really smart because you ended up with a product that was using an input that was not only on sale, right? It wasn't even just free. It was actually companies saying, we'll pay you to take this off our hands and go do something with it. And so there's this company called Toast Ale that we were looking at that said, okay, let me take the heels of bread, all of this stuff that would have been thrown away, let me put it through a process to make craft beer. There are going to be these businesses that actually pay us to take their waste material off their hands so we can use that money to pay our employees and craft brewers to make a really amazing product, and then sell that product to people who love it, huge fans of it, and then all of the profits that come from that go towards restoring regenerative agricultural farms, as well as be able to donate towards nonprofits who are working on food insecurity. And so that's like one level up, right? Not at the product level, but now at the organizational level. Here is an organization that's figuring out how we take waste and we turn it into a great product and a service and an engine to generate more profit and more resources to help communities that were in need. Let's zoom up one more layer. The regenerative design goes all the layers down. So at the top systems layer, there's this really incredible, I think a lot of investments in climate tech are amazing. My favorite one here right now though is Vanguard Renewables, which is really thinking about, all right, there are massive, large-scale amounts of food waste coming out of companies like Unilever and Starbucks, and it happens, you sort of miscalculate or estimate how much is going in. And so that's not the amount of food where you're like, I could make beer out of it and send it out, this is gonna be great. That's at the level where you're like, I have massive amounts, gallons of food to be able to figure out and dispose of. So what they did was really, really smart. They took anaerobic fertilizer vats, these are huge silos, and put the food waste in here and let that food ferment. And once that food is fermenting, it starts to release methane gas, which is a really great clean energy resource to be used on the local farm or to be able to ship out to communities around so you have a source of natural gas and to use. And so again, that win-win-win scenario of here is a waste product that I'll actually pay you to take off my hands. I don't know what to do with it. And another company is taking that in as their feedstock, transforming it and creating both another useful byproduct for another industry to use, as well as taking care of a problem that nobody else really before this point knew what to do with. And so that ability to think beyond the silo of the industry that I'm in and shift into, let me take the resources here, do some alchemy really, and then send it out to another part of the system, I think is how you start to reshift not just the mindset around waste and what it's good for, but also why you need collaboration across different industries in order to zoom out a little bit and start to understand this as an entire systemic shift.
Amazing. You have tons of examples that are amazing. And the big question is, what can we do? We are here with CEOs, business leaders, connecting a lot of people online. What can we do? How can we start?
I think that the first thing is, I mean, I'll do this with all of us here, and anyone who's online, like do this, take a leap of faith when they do it. It's just like, take a really deep breath, like sit up straight and just, and like feel your lungs stretching your rib cage from the inside out, right? And like hold it, I'm holding my breath, just hold it. And realize that, let that breath out, that air and that oxygen that's circulating here and there, like that's everywhere. This isn't just a CEO problem. This isn't just a people who are in a particular country problem. This is an everybody thing. And so what I think is important to remember is that we are a part of nature. Like our fingernails grow, our hair grow, our skin regrows. Regenerative design is something that's happening inside of you, inside of me, every single breath that we take. And that's something that's so important to remember, that empathy that we have with nature might not be something that we're feeling right now. We're in a very, very nice room, you know, this is beautiful. But even when we aren't inside of nature, we are nature. We are regenerative systems. We are regenerative by design. Every 7 years, your cells replace itself. And so that reminder, that constant reminder of the amount of care that we put or forget to put into our bodies is also the same kind of care that we should put into our world, I think is first and foremost top of mind. What kinds of care and rest are you able to give natural systems no matter where you're going, starting with yourself and your sense of understanding what is a natural rhythm, what is a natural cycle, what do I have to do to just maintain being alive and being happy, is the same amount of maintenance times so much to outside and natural systems as well. It starts with, doesn't matter who you are, it's knowing yourself and having that self-awareness that there's not so much of a gap between ourselves as natural systems and the entire world as natural systems. So that's awareness, number one. I think the second one, especially as folks who are at that sea level, we tend to value our time more, the more and more and more we get to that level of decision making, because there's a lot of decisions to make and we want to be efficient with what we're doing. And so I think something that I challenge all executives to do is, if you want to be a future fit executive, you should try living in the future a little bit. Whatever you think that version of the future might be, I hope you think it's a sustainable future. When you live in that sustainable future, is that a future where maybe there isn't single-use plastics? And if that's the future you want to live in, try it. Just for a day, for a week. If you can make it to a month, I challenge you to try that, because then you realize exactly how much change you have to change in just your life to make that future possible. And then you have the real empathy for saying like, okay, all right, this is how much change it would take for my team to do it. This is how much change it would take for my organization to do it. This is how much change it takes for my organization to allow the general public to do it. So that amount of empathy for what it really takes to be living in a different reality, I think is so important. It's just a personal challenge for yourself of saying, I'm not going to do single-use plastic bottles. And anytime someone brings you a drink, you just have to say no. Send it back, please bring me another one. It really helps you start to empathize with all of the different things that have to change and all of the different layers of change. And so that's point number 3 really, is be patient. I think that we want to change so quickly, but if we change things so quickly, it destabilizes systems. And yes, we do want to get to a more sustainable world. Yes, we do want to get to a regenerative future, but to do that really quickly might cause a lot more harm than actually helping the environment or helping people. And so how do you start to understand pace layering, that change? Stuart Brand has this really amazing framework where he's looking at how fast different layers in a systems change. Climate is hopefully the slowest, actually the most stable thing to be changing. And then you have culture, infrastructure, governance, commerce, and fashion is the thing that changes by seasons. And so when you look at your organization as someone who is in that executive level, to be able to understand all of the parts that are happening, you should be able to say, what is my decade-long vision for change? Here's the thing that is going to frankly be cheaper for me to start changing now than wait when there's a real crisis or real emergency later down the line to change. And what are the things that I need to start changing in the near term, the 3 to 5 year scale term? What are the things I need to start changing in the year term? And then what are the things that I need to start changing in the 3 month to a quarter term? When you look at change like that with different pace layers, you start to be able to test things out. The less risky things should be on the 3 month term. These are the goals that you have for your team to say, okay, next quarter, we're gonna come back and see if we've done this. They don't necessarily need to be thinking about something that's happening at the decade scale because they might not have all of the pieces to be able to make that decision or make that information, but you do. And so keeping that all in your minds and knowing that there are certain things that need to shift now in order to take effect later, I think is one of the most important things that at that sea level can happen. So for example, we'll go back to beyond the bag. Plastic bags, different stores, a lot of different solutions. One of the things that we very quickly realized was when you are trying to change something like store infrastructure, right? Like the place where people put their bags down to put their groceries into, that's a change that's actually seems simple, but to roll it out across all of your stores across the country takes about 5 years to do, 5, if not 10 years, because that's the pace of change that a store physically will actually change. Changing behavior for somebody, like putting a sign at the front of the door that says, hey, did you forget your bag? Do you need to go back to your car and get it? That's something that can be done tomorrow. That's a really easy change to make happen. And that way, you're de-risking both the ability to understand and adapt to change as it happens, and as cultural opinions change, as markets change, as regulations change, you're able to make those things a little bit different and make decisions on the fly, but you always have that long-term investment in the back of your minds and on your strategy. So that's the third thing that I would think about. And then the fourth thing that I would think about is actually, how do you create, again, the conditions for change for not just yourself and your company, thinking about it as a whole at the strategic or mission level, but actually the people that are working with you and on specific focus areas. There's a really beautiful quote by this French author who says, if you want to build a ship, don't assign people getting wood and getting glue and learning how to do ship masonry before you teach them how to long for the immensity of the ocean. And I think that that's beautiful. That's one of those moments where you really think about, okay, I can be a really efficient and a really productive leader by assigning my team to do things. But if they don't necessarily understand why they're doing it or what they're working towards, that's a missed opportunity. And so 2 different ways to think about that. The first one is to just inspire them. As a leader of this organization, you have the incredible potential to live by your values and set an example for everyone else to aspire to be like, I want to be like that person. This person is amazing. The other thing that you can do is create the conditions for being able to appreciate nature. We were doing a project with a very, very, very large organization that during the pandemic and during lockdown had sent all of their workers to become remote workers. And they saw a spike in productivity, which was really cool. And it happens because when you're at home, you're like, okay, like I'm in my computer, I want to be done with my work at 5 p.m. and then go have dinner with my kids. When people started to go back into the office, there was a decrease in productivity, and people were wondering why. Is like catching up on work, adjustments and new schedules. But we were doing some research there, and it turns out that it was because a lot of people had lost their ability to spend time in like going out to the park, hanging out with their kids, hanging out with their friends, going out on hikes. And so something that we tried to do was reintroduce biophilic design into the workplace, and that became one of their core principles, is to create an environment where you had reminders of nature, no matter where you were, whether it's windows that are facing somewhere beautiful or just plants around the place to remind you that here is a living, breathing thing, and what you're doing is perhaps a little bit distanced, but towards helping and saving the environment for these living and breathing things to thrive. And then the third thing in that is cultural. I think that sometimes we get so caught up in the immediate task of doing something that's sustainable that we forget about the reason why perhaps we're doing it. And culturally, how do you make the time for not only your team and your employees to be able to reconnect with nature and remember what it's all for, but to actually do it with their kids, to have a little bit of time to say, like, we're going to go to the park as a family, we're going to go see trees and forests and seasides and beaches as a family. Because when you think about regenerative design, that word in there about generation, that's actually what it's about. That's actually that moment where you're realizing, like, oh, this is all for the future. This is for 7 generations into the future for the things that happened 7 generations ago. And I think whenever I think about regenerative design, it's how do you as a leader create the conditions for change, and how do you create the motivation and the cheerleading for all of your people, all of the people in your organization responsible for the things that they're doing every day, to do something wonderful with the time that they have as a part of this mission that you're trying to create together. So that's what I would say there.
That's amazing. I was thinking in how we can create the conditions, and I love your word about caring about our communities, caring about our people in our work, caring about our families. I think as business leaders, we need a big responsibility, and we need to take care about others, and we need to do it now, not in the future, now. Thank you so much, Shuya. For me, it's an honor to have this conversation with you. And I think you really show how we can do it. And you have a lot of examples of what other companies around the world are doing in order to start this movement, in order to change and do something for our planet and for the sustainability of this planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias a todos los que se han conectado de forma presencial, virtual. La verdad que yo quiero invitarlos a empezar este cambio ahora. Nosotros aquí estamos muchos business leaders que realmente quieren un cambio y quieren proponer una agenda de transformación. Nosotros como Supermercados Peruanos y Superfood Holding los invitamos a ser parte de este movimiento, de este cambio de agenda de transformación para mejorar nuestra cadena de valor de una forma mucho más sostenible. El Perú lo necesita, tenemos millones de personas que dependen de nosotros y realmente depende de que nosotros lo pongamos en agenda como una prioridad. Le agradezco muchísimo a Shuya su presencia y espero que nos quede obviamente dentro de nosotros. El cambio empieza ahora y necesitamos de cada uno de ustedes para poder hacerlo, así que como Supermercados Peruanos los invitamos a crear alianzas. Solos probablemente no vamos a poder, así que en la medida que nos unamos realmente en proyectos relevantes para sacar adelante a nuestro país, estoy segura que lo vamos a lograr. Muchas gracias.
Gracias Andrea y Shuya por presentarnos una herramienta que aporta a la solución de problemas sistémicos e impactos negativos ambientales. Este es un enfoque que permite crear condiciones adecuadas para regenerar ecosistemas dañados, cuya aplicación es un imperativo en Perú.